My father-in-law leaned over the hospital bed where I was holding my newborn son and whispered, "Don't get too comfortable, Elena. The trust fund is for heirs of our blood, and according to this private investigator, you're just a temporary vessel we're about to discard." Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Before we dive into today's incredibly intense story of betrayal and ultimate justice, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our community. We love sharing these stories of resilience with you, and your support means the world to us. Now let's get into the tea of how I turned a billionaire family's arrogance into their own destruction. The humidity in Savannah, Georgia, has a way of clinging to your skin like a damp, unwanted silk shroud. It's a city built on top of its own history, where the Spanish moss hangs from the oak trees like tattered lace from a forgotten wedding dress. I stood on the balcony of the Sterling mansion, my hand resting on a cold marble railing that had been imported from Italy 100 years ago. Below me, the historic district breathed with the heavy scent of old money and even older secrets. I was 26 when I married Julian Sterling. Back then, I thought I was living a fairy tale. I was a landscape architect, a girl from a middle-class family in Virginia who found beauty in the dirt and the seasons. Julian was the Prince of the South, a man whose family name was synonymous with power. The Sterlings didn't just live in Savannah, they owned it. From the shipping lanes that fed the coast to the very bricks that paved the squares, the Sterling influence was everywhere. But the moment the vows were spoken, the fairy tale curdled. I quickly learned that in a house like this, you aren't a person. You're an ornament. My father-in-law, Alistair Sterling, was a man who moved through life as if he were God's hand-picked executor. He didn't walk. He glided, his tailored suits never showing a single wrinkle, his eyes always scanning for a weakness to exploit. To him, I was a diversity. Higher for the family tree, a girl with no pedigree who was supposed to be grateful just to breathe. The air in his foyer. "Elena," Alistair would say during those suffocating formal dinners, "the soup is slightly tepid, much like your conversation tonight. Do try to remember that a Sterling wife is expected to contribute more than just a blank stare to the table." Beatrice, his wife, was a different kind of monster. She was the architect of my misery. She lived in a world of high society lunches and charity balls, and she viewed my passion for landscape, architecture, as a personal insult to her status. One afternoon, she called me into her sitting room, a place filled with fragile porcelain and the smell of expensive lilies. "I've taken the liberty of canceling your upcoming project with the city park." "Elena," she said, not even looking up from her needlepoint, "it's frankly embarrassing to have a Sterling woman digging in the mud for a public paycheck. We have an image to maintain. You are a wife now. Your job is to be beautiful, silent, and eventually fertile. Is that understood?" I felt a flash of rage, but in those days, I was still trying to please them. I was still under the illusion that Julian would protect me. Julian, however, was a master of the middle ground. He would hold my hand in the dark and whisper that he loved me, but the moment we were in the light of his parents' presence, he became a puppet. He would laugh at Alistair's cruel jokes and nod at Beatrice's demands. As the months turned into years, the isolation became a physical weight. I wasn't allowed to see my old friends because they were distractions. Wasn't allowed to visit my brother Marcus because he had issues that didn't align with the Sterling brand. I was trapped in a golden cage, surrounded by servants who were essentially Alistair's spies. I spent my days wandering the gardens I had once loved, realizing that I was just another plant in their collection, trimmed, caged, and forced to grow in a direction I didn't choose. The breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with the silence of Julian's growing absence. He began spending weeks in Charleston or Atlanta on business, leaving me alone with his parents. I started to notice things. Ledger books left open in his study, hushed phone calls late at night. I wasn't a fool. I was a professional woman who had run her own business. I knew the difference between a shipping delay and a cover-up. But I was pregnant, and for a while, I let the miracle of the life growing inside me blind me to the rot beneath the floorboards. The labor was a 36-hour marathon of pain and terror. I was in a private wing of the hospital, a wing the Sterlings had donated money to, which meant the nurses treated me more like a high-value patient than a human being. When my son, Leo, finally arrived, the world went quiet. For a brief moment, holding that tiny, warm weight against my chest, the Sterling name didn't matter. The money didn't matter. He was mine. He was pure. But the Sterlings don't do pure. They do ownership. Julian wasn't there when Leo was born. He arrived 3 hours later, smelling of bourbon and expensive perfume that didn't belong to me. He kissed my forehead, but his eyes were on the bassinet. He didn't look like a proud father. He looked like a man who had just successfully closed a difficult merger. "He looks like Alistair," Julian whispered. It felt like a threat. The next morning, the general arrived. Alistair walked into the room, followed by a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. There were no flowers. There was no congratulations. There was only the sound of a leather folder being placed on the rolling hospital tray. "The DNA test was unnecessary, of course," Alistair said, his voice a low, vibrating hum. "The boy has the sterling brow. But the private investigator's report on you, Elena, that was quite enlightening." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about?" He flipped open the folder. There were grainy photos of me in a park, sitting on a bench with a man whose face was hidden by a hoodie. It was Marcus. My brother had reached out to me, desperate for help with a relapse. I had met him secretly to give him money for a private rehab facility because the Sterlings had forbidden me from helping that addict. "You've been embezzling funds from the household account to support a criminal element," Alistair said, leaning over my bed. The scent of his cigars was nauseating. "We have the bank statements. We have the photos. And we have a legal team that will ensure you are labeled an unfit mother before the ink on that birth certificate is dry." I looked at Julian. He was standing by the window, staring out at the Savannah skyline. "Julian, tell him. Tell him it's my brother. You knew Marcus was struggling." Julian didn't turn around. "I think it's best if we handle this the way Father suggests. Elena, you've been unstable. The pregnancy took a toll on your mind. Everyone in the city knows how much you've struggled to adjust to our lifestyle. The betrayal hit me harder than the physical pain of my surgery. They had planned this. They waited until I was at my most vulnerable, physically, broken and emotionally, overwhelmed by a new baby, to discard me. "The trust fund is for heirs of our blood," Alistair whispered, his face inches from mine. "And according to our legal strategy, you're just a temporary vessel we're about to discard. We're keeping the boy. You will be out of the mansion by Friday. You will sign the annulment papers, citing your own mental instability, and you will disappear. If you ever try to contact this child, or if you ever breathe a word of our family's private business to the press, I will ensure your brother spends the rest of his life in a state prison on drug trafficking charges I can easily fabricate." I looked at my son, sleeping peacefully in the bassinet, unaware that his world had just been turned into a battlefield. I realized then that I couldn't fight them with tears. I couldn't fight them with the truth. To beat the Sterlings, I had to become someone they never suspected I could be. I had to be a ghost in their machine. They moved me into a small, cramped apartment on the edge of the city. It was a grace period residence. They called it a place for me to recover before I was officially scrubbed from the Sterling history books. Every time I tried to call the house to hear Leo's voice, the line was blocked. Every time I showed up at the gate, I was turned away by security guards who looked at me with pity. But Alistair had made one critical mistake. He assumed that because I was a gardener, I didn't understand the complexities of their world. He thought my brain was filled with soil pH levels and irrigation charts. He didn't realize that a landscape architect is, at her core, a systems engineer. We understand how things connect under the surface. We know that if you want to kill a tree, you don't chop at the branches. You poison the roots. My brother Marcus was the key. He wasn't the degenerate Alistair claimed. He was a brilliant forensic accountant who had fallen on hard times after our parents died. The rehab I had paid for had worked, and he was now stone-cold sober and looking for a reason to fight. "Elena," Marcus said, sitting in my tiny kitchen surrounded by stacks of papers he'd managed to secure through back-channel contacts. "They think they're untouchable because they've been doing this for 100 years. But old money gets lazy. They've been using the same shipping routes and the same shell companies since the 80s. For 3 weeks, we didn't sleep. While the Sterlings were hosting welcome home parties for Leo, parties I wasn't invited to, we were tracing the Sterling legacy. What we found was a labyrinth of fraud. The Sterling shipping empire wasn't just moving cotton and timber. They were the primary logistics providers for a massive international tax evasion ring. They were moving ghost cargo, empty containers that existed only on paper, to move millions of dollars in untaxed currency across borders. But the shock factor wasn't the crime. It was the owner, Marcus found a document buried in a 1994 filing from Julian's grandfather, the late Silas Sterling. Silas had been a man of immense guilt. He knew his son Alistair was a predator. Silas had inserted a moral integrity clause into the bedrock of the family trust. The clause stated that the Sterling assets, the ships, the real estate, the billion-dollar liquid accounts, were held in a conditional tenancy if the primary trustees, Alistair and Julian, were ever found to be involved in a felony that jeopardized the repute of the family name. The entire estate would automatically bypass them and vest in the next living heir of untainted character. That was Leo. But because Leo was a minor, the clause stipulated that the estate would be managed by a protector appointed by the court, specifically, someone with a proven history of fiduciary responsibility and no blood relation to the Sterling male line. Alistair had tried to frame me as unstable and a thief to ensure I could never be that protector. He had handed me the gun, not realizing it was pointed at his own head. If I could prove their crimes and simultaneously prove I wasn't the unstable thief they claimed, I wouldn't just get my son back. I would be the woman who controlled every penny the Sterlings ever made. Revenge is a dish best served with a detailed filing system. I didn't rush to the police. I knew that in Savannah, the police were often on the Sterling payroll. I had to go bigger. I had to go federal. I spent the next month playing the part of the broken woman. I sent pathetic, rambling emails to Julian, begging for a stipend. I allowed Beatrice's friends to see me at the grocery store looking disheveled. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to believe I was truly defeated. Meanwhile, Marcus was working with a contact at the IRS in the Coast Guard. We were building a map of the Ghost Fleet. They have 3 ships, the Beatrice II, the Savannah Star, and the Sterling Pride, Marcus explained. They're currently at sea. On paper, they're carrying heavy machinery to South America. In reality, they're floating bank vaults. If we can get the Coast Guard to board them when they hit international waters, it's game over. But I needed Alistair and Julian to be in a specific place when it happened. I needed them to be at the Magnolia Gala. It was the crown jewel of the Savannah social calendar, held at the Sterling estate every year. It was where the family displayed their power. I reached out to Julian one last time. This time my voice was steady. Julian, I have something of your father's. A ledger from the 1990s. I think it's something you'd want back before I give it to my lawyer. It was the bait. Julian's arrogance was his blind spot. He didn't think I had found proof of a crime. He thought I was trying to blackmail them for a better divorce settlement. Come to the gala, Elena, Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. We'll have a quiet room set aside. Bring the ledger. We'll talk about your allowance. I hired a professional team. Not a legal team, but a security team. I used the last of my savings to ensure that when the feds moved in, Leo would be moved out immediately. I coordinated with a child advocate I had secretly met with, showing her the unfit mother evidence Alistair had faked and debunking it with my actual medical records and Marcus's clean sobriety blood tests. The night of the gala, Savannah was glowing. The mansion was draped in white flowers, and the air was filled with the sound of a string quartet. I walked through the front doors and the room went silent. I wasn't wearing the simple black dress I'd planned. I was wearing a deep blood-red gown. I didn't look like a mourner. I looked like a queen coming to reclaim a throne. Beatrice approached me, her eyes flaring with indignity. How dare you show your face here? You were told to stay away. I'm just here to return some property, Beatrice, I said, smiling. A gardener always cleans up the yard before she leaves. The study was soundproofed, lined with mahogany books that no one in this family ever read. Alistair sat behind his desk, a glass of 30-year-old scotch in his hand. Julian stood by the fireplace, looking bored. The ledger, Elena, Alistair said. Let's not draw this out. My guests are waiting. I placed the folder on the desk. But it wasn't the old ledger. It was a tablet. On the screen was a live GPS feed of 3 ships in the Atlantic. Do you know what interdiction means, Alistair? I asked. He narrowed his eyes. What is this? Right now, the U.S. Coast Guard is boarding the Beatrice. 2. They've already found the hidden compartments in the hull. You know, the ones that don't appear on the blueprints? The ones filled with $20 million in undeclared offshore cash? Julian stepped forward, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. You're bluffing. You don't have that kind of reach. I don't, I agreed. But the IRS does. And they've been watching your accounts for 6 weeks. ever since a concerned citizen provided them with the passwords to your private server. You really shouldn't use your wedding anniversary as your master password, Julian. It was the only thing you ever gave me that turned out to be useful. Alistair tried to pick up the phone, but I held up a hand. Don't. The FBI is already in the foyer. They're waiting for the signal that the ships have been secured. If you try to destroy any evidence in this room, they'll add obstruction to the racketeering and money laundering charges. The silence in the room was deafening. The man who had called me a temporary vessel was now trembling, his scotch sloshing over the rim of the glass. You've ruined us, Alistair whispered. You've destroyed the Sterling name. Your own son will have nothing. That's where you're wrong, I said, leaning over the desk, mirroring the way he had leaned over my hospital bed. Leo will have everything. I've already filed a petition with the probate court to trigger the moral integrity clause. The moment you're indicted, which should be in about 3 minutes, every asset you own reverts to Leo, and as his mother, I have been vetted by the court as the only fit guardian to manage his interests. I stood up and walked to the door. I'm not a vessel, Alistair. I'm the storm, and you're just a man with a very expensive house that doesn't belong to him anymore. I walked back into the ballroom. The music was still playing, but the front doors had just burst open. The high society of Savannah watched in stunned silence as the most powerful men in Georgia were let out in handcuffs. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I went straight to the nursery. I picked up my son, and for the first time in his life, I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The months following the Savannah scandal were a whirlwind of depositions, court hearings, and media frenzies. The Sterling shipping empire was dismantled and rebuilt. Under the watchful eye of federal monitors and Marcus's forensic team, Alistair Sterling was sentenced to 20 years for a litany of financial crimes. He died in prison 3 years later, alone in a cell that was smaller than his walk-in closet. Julian received 12 years. He tried to write me letters from prison, claiming he was forced by his father to act against me. I never opened them. I burned them in the fireplace of my new home. I didn't keep the mansion. It was a place of ghosts and rot. I sold it and used the proceeds to build a state-of-the-art community center and public gardens in the heart of Savannah. I wanted to put something beautiful over the spot where so much ugliness had lived. I kept the shipping business, but I changed the name to Ascension. Logistics. We became a leader in green, shipping and ethical trade. I hired people who had been overlooked by the old boy network. Women, minorities, and people like Marcus who just needed a second chance. Leo is 10 now. He's a kind, brilliant boy who loves to get his hands dirty in the garden with me. He knows his family history, but he isn't defined by it. He knows that his name isn't a crown. It's a responsibility. Every year on the anniversary of the gala, I take a walk through the public gardens I built. I look at the magnolias and the oaks, their roots deep and strong in the Georgia soil. I remember the girl who was trapped on that balcony, and I smile. The Sterlings thought they could discard me like a weed, but they forgot that some weeds are actually the strongest plants in the garden. They can grow through concrete. They can survive the frost, and if you give them just a little bit of light, they will take over the whole world. I often think back to that hospital room and the chilling words Alistair whispered to me. At the time, they felt like a death sentence, but looking back, they were a wake-up call. They forced me to find the steel in my spine and the fire in my heart. To anyone out there who feels like a temporary vessel in their own life, to anyone being told they aren't enough, or that their voice doesn't matter, remember my story. The people who try to pull you down are usually the ones terrified of how high you can climb. Don't fight their war with their weapons. Build your own. Use your intelligence, your resilience, and your truth. Karma isn't a mystery. It's a mirror. Eventually, everyone has to look at what they've done. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If this story moved you, if you've ever found strength in the middle of a betrayal, please subscribe to our channel and join our community. Your stories of justice are what keep us going. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in your own life. Goodbye.